This is the Dreadful Podcast from TV Podcast Industries, and we're talking about Lovecraft Country Season 1, Episode 6, Meet Me in Daegu.
네가 인간이 되면 알게 될 거야.
전 인간이 되지 않을 거예요, 엄마. 전 더 이상 다른 영혼을 빼앗지 않을 거예요.
아니, 넌 그렇게 할 거야.
전 지금까지 99명 남자들이 인생을 봤지요. 남자들 모두 저 때기보다는 더 나쁜 인생이었어요. 엄마는 왜 자꾸 저를 이런 사람들 속에 속하게 만들려고 강요하는 거냐고요.
왜냐면 내 딸을 다시 찾으려고.
Welcome back, fellow Dreadfuls, to TV Podcast Industries and, of course, the Dreadful Podcast. We are talking about Episode 6 of Lovecraft Country, Meet Me in Daegu. And, of course, you can meet us in Daegu via our podcast. But, yes, I am one of your hosts, inhabited by the Kumiho spirit, John.
God, I hope not. I'm one of your other hosts, Derek. I better keep very clear of you if you're if some tails start to come out of your eyes and ears.
Yes.
Welcome back.
9 tails, in fact. Welcome back, fellow Dreadfuls. It's really great to have you back for this next episode of Lovecraft Country. We played a piece there right at the start, which was in Korean. That was between Uma and Ji-Ah, the mother and daughter here, about this spirit animal, the Kumiho, that has been called into Ji-Ah by her mother, and the idea of getting the 100 souls so that her mother can have her daughter back, and the spirit will no doubt leave the body. But it is the conversation between the two, where Ji-Ah is not going to become human. She doesn't want to be. She does not want to take another soul. She is tantalizingly close to that 100 souls on 99. And of course, her mother is insistent that she will take that final soul so that she can become her daughter without this spirit animal within her. But as Ji-Ah says, I have now seen the lifetimes of 99 men, all more bad than good. Why do you insist on me becoming a part of this world, effectively? We just thought we'd give a little bit of context to the Korean text and dialogue that we opened up this episode of the Dreadful Podcast on.
It just feels like such a courageous thing to do almost, and HBO has definitely never shies away from doing interesting things with their shows, but definitely thought it was a really interesting move to have an episode set in Korea and 90% of it spoken in Korean. You know, there's so many shows over the last 10 years that would have had an out here. You know, very simply, you have a character like Ji-Ah who's speaking to Atticus, your main character from the rest of the season. They absolutely could have just done more scenes between the two of them where there was more English spoken. And most shows would have taken that. They would have had a few scenes in Korean, but this entire episode, pretty much like 90% of it, is Ji-Ah, from her perspective, speaking in Korean with her friends, her family, all about this situation of this mystical spirit that has become part of her, really.
Yes,
so,
absolutely.
Really
called into her.
Yes.
But we'll certainly get that into our discussion of the podcast. And just to remind all our fellow Dreadfuls and new listeners who are coming on board, this will be a spoiler-filled discussion, so please watch the show before listening to the podcast. If you are new, you can subscribe to us, rate us, leave a review on any good or evil podcast catcher of your choice. Or alternatively, you can head on over to tvpodcastindustries.com to listen to the podcast as well. So, yes, you can find us on any listening podcast catcher that you decide to tune on into to listen to your favorite shows.
Exactly. We're now available on Amazon Music, John. Just arrived on there last week. All of our shows, all of TV podcast industries as a whole, plus all the individual shows that we have for all the shows that we've covered. You can go find them over on Amazon Music. Pretty good interface, actually. Just launched this week for the podcast section of Amazon. So, that's quite cool. Quite delighted to be over there. Always good to launch on a new platform.
Yeah, definitely. So please, check us out, and we will be there talking all about Lovecraft Country. Exactly. We are also talking all about The Boys as well. Yeah. That is on Amazon Prime at the moment. So if your tastes move from horror into comics, well then, of course, we have the podcasts for you to listen to.
Absolutely.
But let us get into this episode 6 of Lovecraft Country. Meet me in Daegu. Derek, what are some of the episode details?
Well, the episode was directed by Helen Shaver. She's done lots and lots of TV, so many great shows that she's done. She did 2 episodes of the first season of 13 Reasons Why, did 3 episodes of Orphan Black, 6 episodes of Vikings, and 2 episodes of Snowpiercer, the new TV show that was out this year. That was a really good TV show. I really enjoyed that show. Really built from the beginning and from something that I didn't expect from the Snowpiercer movie. I expected to kind of follow that train, let's say. And the actual show took some really interesting turns as it went through. So, really good work by everybody involved in that show. Really
she's done a lot of great shows. Vikings I loved, even though I saw it on a flight back from Thailand, pretty much in the dark. It was so dark, the show on the plane, and because it was on one of those little screens, I think I didn't really know who was even in it. So I was more listening to a teleplay being read out, really. Occasionally I got a flicker of a candle in one of the great Viking halls.
I remember looking over and just thinking for hours on end, it was just a picture of some candles that was on John's screen. Hilarious.
But I still loved it.
Yeah. And also directed, as I said, episodes of Orphan Black, starring Tatiana Maslany. Some big news this week on a show that we're going to be covering on TV Podcast Industries. Tatiana Maslany, the central character in Orphan Black, will be playing Jennifer Walters on the She-Hulk TV show. So that's going to be really interesting. Tatiana Maslany is just fantastic in Orphan Black. If you haven't seen it, she plays, I think, 14 different characters over the run of the series.
Yeah.
And really good, really different. So bringing her into the Marvel Universe would be very cool.
A great show there. Mm-hmm. So done loads as Helen Shaver. Great stuff.
Absolutely. The episode, once again, teleplay written by Misha Green, this time with Kevin Lau, who's the story editor for the show. He's been involved in every episode of the show as one of the story editors. So, he's involved in the setting of this particular episode. So, excellent work here. John, do you want to tell us what they gave us with your synopsis for the episode?
Sure. 1949, with Korea on the brink of war between North and South, a Korean nursing student, Ji-Ah in Daegu, with an interest in American movies, is looking for soulmates. During the summer of 1950, in the midst of the now raging Korean War, Ji-Ah and her fellow shift nurses are taken by American soldiers to root out a communist spy at the hospital. Her remaining memory of this violent encounter is the detention of her best friend Unni and the execution of 2 of her colleagues, one at the hands of an American GI named Atticus. As summer moves to autumn, Ji-Ah encounters Atticus again, and she vows to take revenge and his soul. But as she seduces Tic, an unlikely bond forms between them, but the urge of the spirit animal Kumiho still requires its souls. But in the throes of passion, the 9 tails of the Kumiho attach to Atticus, revealing to Ji-Ah Tic's past, present, and future.
As you mentioned, very interesting kind of backstory. This is the flashback episode that we see so often in TV shows, kind of expanding the history of our main character, Atticus, through this story of Ji-Ah. The last week's episode 5, ended with Atticus translating some of the pages from the Book of Adam, and when he translated it, he realized there was a word, die, that he translated. Then he called up Ji-Ah in Daegu, saying to her she was right. And this is the episode explaining what it is that she's right about, really. So, really interesting way of doing this. I wouldn't have expected that this is where we were going to go at all.
Not at all, but what a great episode. Sort of, in part delving into the history, of the Korean War, in part, delving into the supernatural myths and legends in Southeast Asia and specifically Korea. So really enjoyed this episode a lot, and was very surprised that we had this flashback episode effectively back to Korea right on that kind of start of the Korean War.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're probably going to cover the episode slightly differently than we normally do, because normally there's multiple stories and multiple interweaving strands that are going on in these episodes. But it seems like this episode really is all about Ji-Ah. So probably let's just talk through the episode. John, are you happy enough with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So where do you want to start with the story? One of the things I want to say probably at the beginning is I love how they got the episode name for the show, which I thought was really interesting. It opens up with Ji-Ah sitting watching an American musical, which is Meet Me in St. Louis. So she is so intrigued and so interested in American movies. That's kind of the starting point for the episode. And the episode is Meet Me in Daegu. So nice little reference there that they pulled out. So she's kind of living her life through these American films to begin with. Where do you want to start? What do you want to speak about?
For me, it's the Kumiho spirit, to be honest, just because in effect, it is this spirit that understands where Tic is heading, and just to bring out, that initial meeting of this Kumiho spirit. I was wondering what on earth was coming out of Ji-Ah in that first encounter. That almost like hairy worms, and then realizing that this is a spirit animal which is legendary in Southeast Asia, and it's a 9-tailed fox. So it's actually the tails of the fox that are coming out of Ji-Ah.
Yeah, it's only when she says it at one point, she says something like, I'm not going to unleash my tails again. And I was going, oh, that's what they are. Because I was thinking, like, was it spider legs? Was it the tentacles like Cthulhu has?
Exactly.
Was it something like that? Had no idea of this concept at all, really. Even at points I was kind of thinking, was it like the succubus that we've seen in American Gods and throughout legend, effectively the praying mantis almost that killed its prey, something like that. So I had all those images, and I absolutely love learning this kind of mysticism of other cultures being brought into this show as well, because there's so many options here. We were talking before about what happens if they get a season 2 for Lovecraft Country, because season 1 has kind of gone through the book basically, and there's only one book. Here it's kind of showing you that it can go anyway. Next season could be literally 10 episodes of spooky ghost stories from various foreign countries. They have loads of options here. Really.
It's really, really interesting. First of all, as well, I didn't understand speed dating was so old at all. I was kind of thinking that was something invented in the late 90s, early noughties, to be honest. But and here we have it in 1949 as Ji-Ah is looking for this soulmate. Little does she know that she isn't actually going to be successful in the speed dating, but she does pick up a man in a bar after the speed dating, and we see the exploding man, and as she I had hairy tentacles. I just didn't know what they were as it latched onto him, and you see that as the soul is being devoured, as the flesh of the man is being devoured, that Ji-Ah can see the memories of the man's life, and really, really interesting. She also then goes through an American GI as well, and ultimately we have the really great kind of tenseness that Atticus is potentially a victim, will be the 100th soul that Ji-Ah and the Kumiho spirit will feast on. Just some background on the Kumiho spirit. It was really, really interesting. So as I say, it's a 9-tailed fox of legend. And there are similarities here. The Kumiho is from Korea, but there are also equivalent counterparts in Chinese legend and in Japanese legend as well.
Right.
They are called the Huli Ying and the Kitsune, and they're the different names.
Right.
The interesting thing about these Korean, Chinese, Japanese myths and folklores is the Kumiho spirit is an old ancient spirit. It's over 1,000 years. It can be shape-shifting. It will freely transform, but amongst other things, so it can inhabit and change. And often it is in a beautiful woman who is set out to seduce men and eat their liver or heart, depending on the legend.
Right.
I think the crucial difference here with the Korean form of this folklore is that it is depicted ultimately as being an evil creature. And the moral compass is more ambiguous within the Chinese and Japanese traditions, where they can be for good or for evil.
Right.
I think here, though, potentially that moral ambiguity is presented within Ji-Ah, where she ultimately doesn't feast on Atticus for whatever reason, and she doesn't want to. I think there's an overarching sort of progression and movement towards the fact that this Kumiho spirit does want to feast on Atticus, but there's still part of Ji-Ah there, or indeed the spirit that is trying to stop that. And that kind of links to the opening quote that we took, which is, she's seen so much bad in the world. Maybe something that spirit is easy to live with because of that she is an evil creature, that why would you bring then Uma's daughter Ji-Ah back into this world?
Yeah.
So I think with the war as well surrounding this, the behavior of men, that she's happy to live in this world and prevent Ji-Ah from coming into this pretty violent, unequal world. So I thought this was really, really interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's probably part of what I saw in what was going on with the Kumiho. It's effectively that it's visiting vengeance on evil men. The reason it's brought into life effectively by Ji-Ah's mother is because her second husband, or her husband, not Ji-Ah's father, had been raping her for years, and effectively she brings the Kumiho into being to punish him for what he did, but the price is that she has to now kill another 99 bad men, effectively. So you see what happens when we see the first visions, I suppose, of the man that she kills, that you see that he's cheating on his wife. He has a daughter, he has a wife that he's cheating on with Ji-Ah. So part of that whole experience that she's had of the memories of 99 men is that it's 99 bad men, 99 people who've done bad things, and she's seeing all the badness in them and representing that as being her vision of the world, effectively. So it's been shaped by all of the men that she's taken. I loved this whole setup from the beginning, because you think of them as a family on the outs. You see that initial discussion that you have between Ji-Ah and her mother is that the family used to be able to borrow from their neighbors when they ran out of food, but now they have to make their own food that lasts all the way through the winter because they have nothing, and they were seen as pariahs after her husband was killed or after her husband died.
Yeah.
Everybody leaves them alone. So you think of Ji-Ah as being this real innocent. You think the way her mother's saying it to her is kind of, it sounds like her mother's going to her, you need to bring a man home so that we can take care of ourselves. And if you don't bring a man home, we're going to die during winter because we don't have enough food to get through it. So that kind of weight that's put on the speed dating for her is you're kind of going, this poor little innocent Ji-Ah can't even find a man for herself.
Yes, exactly.
And she seems to be making a really nice connection with one of the speed dates that she has. The other two think she's a bit weird because of her love of American films. But this guy seems to be on the right side. And then you find out it's not bringing men home to marry to take on the world. It's bringing men home to kill them so that her mother can get back her daughter to their lives, which is such an interesting twist, because I certainly wasn't expecting that's the way it was going to go.
Yeah, it's really, it's so beautifully done. I mean, even right at the end as well, with the lady in the campsite in the snow. I was trying to, I suppose in Western culture, maybe a witch-like figure, or a soothsayer of some description that can, draw upon a shaman that can pull on the on these myths and legends and call upon these spirits. It was really, really interesting that you see the fox there. You see this fox in the snow, representing the spirit animal.
It took me ages to work out why the fox was there staring.
Well,
at
exactly. It was only after and looking up Kumiho that okay, that's why the fox is there.
Yeah.
But also the shaman lady says, you have not yet become the darkness that you will be. You'll encounter many deaths before you are done. And so even though she's one soul away, it seems to suggest that maybe Ji-Ah's mum, Uma, has possibly misinterpreted the deal that she made with the shaman.
I thought that too, yeah.
And so that was also a fascinating kind of ending. It leaves very much that this will continue in some way. I wonder whether she will make her way to America. We see that she has this penchant for American movies, particularly the musicals.
With Judy Garland, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So really, that was really good. And I also loved in this just the whole situation between Atticus and her. I mean, ultimately in this episode, we see Atticus as an American GI in the Korean War. Some Koreans see them as liberators. Some of them see them as invaders. You get that view coming through a number of the different characters here. Ji-Ah's best friend is a communist spy in the hospital. You hear her mother saying that the Americans are no better than the Japanese that also occupied the Korean peninsula back in the day.
And you see the representation of that as a communist is lynched effectively by the community, strung up in the street and strangled to death. And the American GIs are standing looking on. They're not interfering in what the community are doing. They're effectively supporting what they're doing by them killing communists. One of the things I just, sorry, not to correct you, John, but the thing about her friend, Unni, she may or may not be the communist spy. I think that's kind of the thing. She is a communist, certainly, and they're looking for someone that's releasing information to the communists. It feels like she actually was just protecting Ji-Ah by saying, blame it on me. But there may have been other people there. It feels like while she is a communist, I don't know whether we have enough information to say that she was actually giving information to the communists.
It could be the orderly. There's a moment where she's seen speaking to an orderly by Ji-Ah.
That's right.
And Ji-Ah just assumes that this is a budding relationship starting up. And she says, no, he's a communist. And that's when we begin to understand Ji-Ah's best friend's own sort of belief or political persuasion here. So, but it ultimately ends up in a very, very dark place, with, the Ji-Ah's shift, the nurse shift of that time being taken by the Americans to a remote location where they're asked to kneel, and two, of the nurses are executed. They're looking for this communist spy, and one of those executed, one of the nurses is executed by Tic. His commanding officer, his gun jams, and ultimately he asks Tic to come in, and Tic comes along and shoots this. And then ultimately Unni gives herself up and is taken away, and all the nurses are sent back. So it's a really brutal scene, really violent. It certainly puts context as well around Atticus's conversations in the previous episodes about really bad things happening in Korea. That idea of the PTSD that you would get from doing something like that. And what happens is he later finds himself in hospital, wounded, where Ji-Ah is, and she vows revenge in that moment. But there is this weird bond that forms. I mean, she is ultimately seducing Tic to get him into bed to unleash her hairy tails, effectively, and take that soul. But she realizes through their encounters of her finishing the Count of Monte Cristo off for Atticus because his glasses are broken, in terms of him opening up about the bad things that he has done. Like he's not proud of what he did, either with the nurses or, during the war, and the things he's done there that maybe we haven't seen, or what he's been asked to do.
Well, I think the kind of representation that's there of him murdering one of the nurses is that he does it without hesitation. He's just called, "Private, come over here." He takes his gun out. He shoots the nurse in the face. He absolutely would have done that to Ji-Ah if not for the intervention of Unni. So without getting any kind of conversation between the two of them, or without getting time between the two of them, I can absolutely see why Ji-Ah would think Tic is a bad man. And it's only after he's had this time to recover and this time of reflecting on what he's done that he kind of realizes how bad everything he's done. He explains that the whole reason he's in the army is to get away from the bad life he had at home. Now, we know, obviously,
absolutely,
from the series, how bad his life really was at home with his father Montrose. You see it in the flashbacks that Ji-Ah sees, or the visions that she sees of his past, how bad his home life was, So I like how their relationship builds, and you can see it with the conversations again with Ji-Ah and her mother, where she's saying to her, "You are now becoming the monster. You're falling for the man that killed your best friend. That makes you a monster.
Yeah.
More than any of the things that you've done, the monstrous things you've done in the past, you are a monster." Leading to that great conversation between Ji-Ah and Tic, where she's saying to him, "Yes, we've done monstrous things, but neither of us are monsters. We both understand what has led us to these points." So.
Exactly. That is the bond that forms between them. Mm-hmm. And I think also, you have that great conversation on the bench outdoors. There's Tic and another Ji-Ah, who is of Korean descent, and then there is Ji-Ah, and they're talking about Judy Garland, and she says, "Have you ever met Judy Garland?" And they both laugh. Tic goes, "That would only happen if I was her butler, and he was her driver. In America, colored folks are treated differently," he says.
Yeah.
And they both go on to say that, even in their own country, we're hated, or we're seen as the enemy.
Yeah.
And as you say, the draft was how the Korean GI got brought in, but he says, well, Tic actually volunteered. He wasn't drafted. And as you mentioned, it was for him to escape, the world in which he lived on the south side of Chicago. He tried to escape through books, but that ended up not being enough. And he says now it's full circle back to books with the whole, Alexander Dumas and the Count of Monte Cristo being read to him. So it's really nicely, so it's a really nice conversation here. I really enjoyed that kind of circularity.
Yeah.
And I think it's that conversation, because Ji-Ah says, well, why do you fight for this country that doesn't respect you, hates you, treats you differently? And it's very reminiscent of the same kind of narrative coming from Vietnam. And I think ultimately it's something that happened in the Korean War, World War II, World War One.
Absolutely.
This is history repeating itself effectively, rather than being simply something of the Vietnam War. So this is kind of really, it's fascinating again. And, we have Ji-Ah effectively confessing that, she did want to kill him. There is that moment when Tic has put on a Judy Garland movie for her at the American base. They go back to hers, and I was just thinking, will the tickle monster come out effectively?
Not so ticklish. No.
But this bond has kind of cemented Tic and Ji-Ah together, as you say, primarily in the sense that they have both done monstrous things, that connection primarily. And I just thought it was really, really great stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I just want to quickly reference the Count of Monte Cristo book, because it's come up so often throughout the show, and I kind of like what's happening here with Tic. So he's run away from his father Montrose, but he's still reading Count of Monte Cristo. And it seems like it's multiple times he's read the book. He knows already the ending, even though he hasn't got to the end. And that comes out as very evident. I love to see it effectively, where she, Ji-Ah is explaining the end of the book to him, saying, this is how it ends. It's a bit crap, really. And he goes, that's not how the book ends. You absolutely have to read the book now. You've clearly just seen the movie, right? And so I kind of like the reference to that. But I do like that Tic is reading Count of Monte Cristo, almost understand Montrose better. If he understands Montrose's favourite book, maybe he can understand his father better, which I love as a reference to who he is as a character. He feels that people are represented by their favourite books, effectively. That's my reading of it anyway. And the explanation that comes from Tic as to who his father is, it's either he liked the concept of the book, which is after years of oppression, the man gets his revenge, the Count gets his revenge on his imprisoners, or it's because it's written by a black author and it's a very popular book. It's one of those two things, but he can't really work out what Montrose's motivation is. So it feels like he's reading the book multiple times to understand his father more. That's my reading on it.
Yeah, I think that is how I understand it as well. And I think it also feeds into his relationship with Ji-Ah as well in this moment whilst he's in Korea serving the American army.
Yeah.
So it kind of flows through all the elements of these episodes kind of really nicely. You know, we have the reference to it in the first episode or second episode when Montrose is being held in the stone tower by the lodge back in Ardham County.
Yeah.
So it's again a really nice reference point throughout a lot of these episodes here. The other thing I really liked here is on the second date that Ji-Ah is unable to hold back, I suppose, the Kumiho spirit, and we have her foxtails coming out and it going to his eyes. I think originally when the first guy, the Korean guy, was being attacked by her tails, I thought it was going into his eyes, and on Atticus it looked more like it was doing a sucker across the eyes to
Windows,
read
exactly of the soul, John.
Windows into the soul. And this is where she sees that if he goes home he will die, and warns Tic. But of course Tic is in absolutely no fit state to take on board any of that, hence why you know, as the time has passed and what's happened to him back in America, he phones her up to say, you were right.
Exactly.
Because I just thought it was fantastic that you see Atticus freaking out the way he did after being held and read by those tales of Ji-Ah, and him freaking out and racing home.
Yeah.
So, you know, she's begging him, pleasing him to stay. Why don't you stay here? And I presume she's able to read the future here because she doesn't kill him. I'm not too clear whether she was able to read the future of the first man, or whether it was just his past. And with the dead GI that she also seduces and explodes, again, we don't know, we don't see his memories there, but I presume that the memories of Tic's future is because she isn't killing him in this moment.
Well, exactly, because the other two didn't have a future, John.
Yeah, because
So
she
the future was
explodes
she killed
him.
him. She
Yeah,
killed him.
exactly.
That's their future.
I do like the fact that I can't imagine Uma, her mum, going, I have to scrub down this room again.
99 times.
Exactly. That's a lot of blood to dispose of, because it is spick and span after each. I suppose you have to clean the blood down pretty quickly, otherwise before it dries and goes hard. But
well,
like,
there's certainly,
yeah.
and I know I'm just conscious of the room itself has the traditional walls and structure, the paper walls effectively, which get covered in blood every time. How do you clean blood off paper? You know, answers on a postcard, I guess, but tell me how to clean blood off paper. Doesn't happen very often. I don't actually need the ability to do that. But her mother is the one that cleans up the room with her. That's part of the ritual effectively that she has to go through. She kills a person, kills a man, takes its soul, and then her mother comes into the room and cleans up the room. But yes, certainly there's moments there where you're kind of looking, that's a lot of mess to clean up.
Yeah,
Every
exactly.
time. But one thing I do want to point out in the visions that Ji-Ah has of Tic and what he's done in the past, she sees his young life, she sees him being beaten by Montrose,
Yeah.
but she also sees her friend Unni getting tortured by Tic.
Yeah,
Tic is holding her down while she's getting her teeth ripped out
Yes.
by the commander, effectively. So she sees some really bad things within Tic. and then sees his present and his future effectively. So
yeah, it looks, that future part looks like he's kind of caged up
yeah,
and hanging sort of almost like in a cage, but it's almost like it's belts around him, holding him in position.
exactly.
But he did still look like he was alive, but I don't know.
It keeps going, and it looks like he's got spittle dripping from his mouth as he dies, and that looks like the final moment of his death is what it seems like.
So it's, you know, it's pretty it's pretty gruesome, the memories that she sees in Tic. And I kind of like how the show has taken Atticus, you know, that the great guy from the 5 episodes, and you see some of the horror that he's inflicted in wartime, that he's unable to articulate then back in America, and how the difference of you know, the orders that he's given to do, where you're unquestioning, and then how questioning he is back in Southside Chicago, and questioning the orders effectively that would come from police, or the, you know, that bias, that systemic bias and racism within the society that is and should be questioned. And then in the war situation, it is get your gun, and it's very quick. There's no hesitation.
Yeah.
It's an order that he obeys.
Exactly.
But you see that it has eaten him up in his discussions with Ji-Ah.
Well, better than Ji-Ah eating him up, I suppose.
Well, exactly.
So yeah, it is. You're absolutely right. It does lead into who Tic is. This is the last time he sees Ji-Ah before going back to America. We saw the vision that he had back in episode 2, where he had this Korean woman, he had Ji-Ah dressed as a GI attacking him in the vision, and he murdered her effectively. So now we kind of see why he's so angry at her, and why he still has ill feelings towards this woman that he absolutely loved, because, as he described himself, it ended weirdly. So
it really did.
So I'm wondering, as we get on from this episode, will we see Ji-Ah come to America? Will we see her on the phone with him? Will we see any further interaction between the two of them? Now that she's gone for this visit with the mystic who brought the Kumiho alive within her body, will there be new direction for what she's going to be doing in the future? Will we see that character back in the rest of the season, or was this just a backstory of why Tic is where he is and why he contacted him?
I would love to see Ji-Ah back. I really hope that she does come to America, or Tic goes to Korea, because she was such a great character here. The complexities of the emotions of what she's having to do, the conversations with her mother, Uma. I loved Uma as well. Like, she was resolute to Ji-Ah as inhabited by this spirit. I kept feeling that a hairy tail was going to come out and kind of do something to her mum, because her mum challenged the spirit. Yeah. You know, I want my daughter back. Exactly. I will have my daughter back. This is how it's going to go.
Well, you feel like it must have just taken so much here. The reason why she's so resolute is because she's so close to the point that she feels the price will be paid for what she had to do to get rid of her former husband, effectively. So of course she's resolute now. She's had to do this 99 times effectively. She's like, just one more and then we can go back to our normal life. So I did love the tale between the two of them. I thought that was really interesting.
It really was. Yeah. I thought it was fascinating.
I think that's it for the episode itself. Any kind of notes from the episode you want to talk about, John? Anything else we haven't discussed?
No, that's everything I wanted to discuss from the episode. Yeah.
Okay. Just one or two things just to pick out that we haven't really talked about. I thought it was interesting that Atticus was talking about the reason why he was able to get the movie for Ji-Ah when they went on that first initial date, effectively. He got the movie Summer Stock, and the reason he got it was because of his Uncle George. So again, mentioning his Uncle George, mentioning this character that died in the first couple of episodes of the show. So interesting that we're still getting him involved in the story here. Also, absolutely want to mention for our long-term listeners, the actress playing Ji-Ah in the show is Jamie Chung, who we saw for 6 episodes of Gotham, where she played Valerie Vale.
She did.
The aunt of Vicky Vale, as one of the major characters on the show for, I think it was season 4, that she was involved in. But I only found out today that she originally got her start on The Real World in 2002, an American reality TV show, and then moved into acting afterwards. So I just thought that was fascinating. I remember The Real World very well.
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
my TV show. So you can make good after doing reality TV.
You certainly can. Yeah, The Real World was great. I loved that.
Yeah, but acting's much better, and non-reality TV shows are much better than that. Speaking of which, John, overall, what do you think of this episode?
I really enjoyed this. It was such an interesting departure from being in Southside Chicago and in the US. I give this 5 foxy tails out of 5. This was really just so interesting.
Yeah.
The whole relationship between Ji-Ah and her mother, and the price that her mother had to pay to effectively stop her daughter from being raped by her husband, and the shame that has been brought on the family. I mean, we do hear the reason why Ji-Ah is learning to become a nurse is to bring back honor and respect back to the family.
Yeah,
I found that really interesting, and I think there's a nice envelope around this episode about the American involvement in Korea and the Korean War, and some of the things that we see here are pretty extreme and brutal.
Yeah.
And I mean, particularly to nurses, you think of at the moment with the amount nurses are working to prevent the spread of COVID and the health sector in general, that because it's happening to nurses, it almost feels like it's breaching the conduct of war or the Geneva Convention, that effectively 2 nurses have just been executed.
Who did nothing as well.
Exactly. Did nothing.
Like there may be a question over Unni as to whether she is the communist spy or not, but she certainly has confessed to Ji-Ah that she is a communist. Not that, as I say, not necessarily that she's the spy, but the other 2 nurses did absolutely nothing other than take care of American GIs brought into their hospitals.
Yeah. And then the Kumiho spirit in itself, this Korean interpretation of similar folklore as well that you find in Southeast Asia within China and Japan, but also again just broadening out folklore myths. We've seen South American ones, African, North American, and it's really so rich and interesting. And then ultimately the relationship that starts as one of revenge by Ji-Ah against Atticus for what he did in that execution of one of the nurses, and the kidnap of her best friend Unni, to one where she sees that they are 2 sides of the same coin, effectively, birds of a feather or foxes of a tail, something like that. I just thought it was really so well done, and I want to see these 2 characters continue. Obviously, Atticus will, but I really want to see Ji-Ah back in this show. I thought she brought an amazing amount of strength, empathy to this episode.
Excellent. I think I'd continue what I said last week, that this again feels like an episode of The Twilight Zone, but with connective tissue back to the show. Absolutely, it does explain some of the things we've learnt about Tic, but I am perfectly happy if this is the way that the show wants to go for its 7 or 8 season run. If they do continue to do seasons of Lovecraft Country and it turns into This is Lorecraft Country, I'm perfectly happy if they have stories as interesting and as detailed and complex as this, learning about mythology and learning about creatures from other countries and the things that terrify everybody in their own folklore in their own countries. I'd be really intrigued if that's the way the show goes. the central storyline of the show is absolutely interesting, of course, and I'm happy to get back to that next week now that we have this piece that we've learned about Atticus's history. Certainly we know more about his character from this experience through Ji-Ah, and we know more about what happened to him in Korea and what made him change as a person. Interesting, just the reference here that this was his first time that he was going with Ji-Ah. He's an innocent. He's a virgin, in this moment. And we mentioned before the general, horror overview of the trope effectively of a virgin is that they survive to the end. So interesting that she didn't take his life, as he's a virgin. So I thought that was a nice touch. We also saw with Letty that her first time was with Atticus as well. So both of these characters, very virginal characters in the story. So just little touches in there that I think are really intriguing. And I love, again, I suppose, having Misha Green being involved in the writing of every episode as the showrunner for the show, that, you know, she's able to tie all of these episodes together, even when they're covering very different subjects and very different topics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really good. Love this. Looking forward to the next episode. We do have tons of feedback that we have for the episode, partly to do with, unfortunately, I didn't pull out one or two pieces of feedback that we got in on previous episodes, but we are so happy to get your feedback in. Please keep emailing us. I'd love to hear your thoughts about episode 6 of Lovecraft Country. Email us to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com or pop over to our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/tvpodcastindustries.
Yes, and we're also on Twitter at tvpodindustries. And of course, if you want to send in audio feedback, you can send up to 90 seconds of your thoughts by heading on over to tvpodcastindustries.com and clicking on the right-hand tab there and leaving your thoughts, discussion points, or comments. But with that, let us get into the feedback. All the feedback for this episode is all about Lovecraft Country episode 5. That's the one with the butterflies.
Exactly.
And the metamorphosis.
Where should we start, John? Should we start with the wonderful Steve Brown's voicemail?
Yes.
Hello, John and Derek. This is Steve, and this is for Lovecraft Country episode 4. Is it 4? 5? 4. 5. Anyway, strange case. Really interesting episode. I'm again this it is episode 5. I just saw that. Anyway, never mind. That's beside the point. But I just, so much was revealed in this episode. I did get a little spoiled because I happened to scroll through Facebook and I saw the spoiler post and I saw a comment under it. And as soon as I saw the comment, I knew kind of what it meant. And I just was waiting throughout the episode, for that hammer to drop, so to speak. But, no big deal. I don't care about spoilers. I think anybody who's heard my voicemails knows that. But, it was kind of cool to see the different transformations. Very American Werewolf in London style is what it looked like to me. The kind of makeup effect that was done there, it was very reminiscent of that. And I'm not sure what episode. I've got so many podcasts I'm trying to listen to that I'm not even sure where I'm at with y'all's podcast and what number you've got feedback on. So I know you're playing these as you get them and as you cover the episodes. But episode 4, wow. Episode 4. Again, it's episode 5, Steve. Come on. Anyway, just a couple of big moments for me that I thought was really, really great. I was totally blown away and surprised and troubled by the scene with Ruby and the manager of the store. I thought, wow, Ruby's gone very dark. And we didn't see Hippolyta and the universe mobile this time. So I hope we may not get something about that in the next episode or not. I guess the next episode may be a flashback to the Korean War. So, okay, I've gone long and I've rambled. So, I'm just going to let it be. Talk to you later.
Thanks so much, Steve. I understand how confusing it can all be. I know that Steve's covering, he's almost at the end of Umbrella Academy Season 2 on his own podcast, Panels to Pixels. Go check that out. Really, really good. And I know he also sends in feedback on Cobra Kai for Podcastica podcast. He sends in feedback to Riemann Paik over in Strange Indeed for their podcast about Umbrella Academy. He sent in feedback to us for The Boys and for Lovecraft Country every episode. Thank you so much. I can totally understand why it's difficult to keep it all straight. I find it difficult just doing 2 episodes a week. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Steve. Yeah, Ruby did go to a dark place with that stiletto heel, but it was certainly, I think, cathartic for her, however difficult to watch. And
I love that you called her a new personal hero last week, John.
Well, I think she was. I think I found her fascinating last week, and that transformation between going into Hillary's skin as a white woman and then back to Ruby and her conversations. It was very philosophical, I thought, in many respects, and it threw in a great amount of horror. There's a reason why horror is within like folk tales and myths of different cultures, including from this episode, episode 6, is it gives very strong messages and stories. So it's really interesting. And I'm looking forward to seeing Hippolyta back as well. For sure. I want to see, are we going to actually see her at Ardham or Devon County on the trail of what happened to George? Or is it going to be a situation where she arrives back to the south side of Chicago knowing the truth of the matter?
Okay.
So it'll be interesting. I really want to see her and her daughter Dee on that trip into that quite frankly freakish and scary world of Devon and Ardham County and the people that live there.
Absolutely.
So I think that would be really interesting.
Yeah, I think there's an adventure to come between the two of them and what they may be looking for in Ardham County. So really, really cool. Thanks so much, Steve. Oh, nice reference there to American Werewolf in London as well, and the particular transformations that were in when episode 5 of Lovecraft Country. They did feel very body horror, very American Werewolf in London. Excellent. Thanks so much, Steve. Let's get on to some more feedback, John.
Yeah, over on Facebook for episode 5, we have a good number of comments. First off, Angie Arhouse says, "You were right saying William and Christina were never in the same room together, and they kind of looked alike. Might be the same person." Well, same person. Wow, another gut-wrenching episode, but I love it. Also from Donald Dennis, he says, "Wow, Derek, you called it with having never seen those two people, William and Christina, at the same time. This episode, while great, really set my teeth on edge with the level of awkward discomfort about when the spell would wear off. Also, nobody seemed to care about the puddles of goo after they happened. I mean, you'd think someone at the department store would mention the blood-stained elevator." The contrast between the two club scenes was very stark, and both of them would probably have horrified Lovecraft himself. All in all, a very well-acted episode with great follow-through on exploring both twists on his themes and the everyday fears some people have to live with. Doug Green also says, "This show is a hard watch, and this week it finally got to me. I had to skip past the metamorphosis scene. It's the first time in forever I haven't been able to sit through something." Thanks so much, Angie, Donald, and Doug for the feedback. Yes, our very own Derek O'Neill was absolutely spot on with the call about William and Christina. And I think, I think people will find some of the elements of this show, whether it's to do with looking at people and how they behave to one another and their place in society, or whether it is the horror element as well. It is tough to watch. And I think the metamorphosis scene, absolutely, with the cracking. I actually think you got accustomed to it throughout the episode, but that first moment where you see the bumps moving over the skin, and certainly with William using the knife the first time on Ruby, it really was a lot to take in. And I do get you, Donald. I had the same thought myself about all the bits of skin and blood. I think Hillary smears as she's changing back to Ruby. Hillary is smearing blood along the wall as well as she gets to the elevator. And I could just imagine one of the shop assistants coming down and just effectively turning around and heading right on back up to the main floor after seeing the blood smeared across the wall. Or
calling the police and wondering who got murdered down
exactly.
there.
It's it is it was tough, but I found it fascinating.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, thanks again for the feedback over on Facebook. As I said, you can go over to Facebook every week. I put up a spoiler post for each of the episodes of Lovecraft Country where you can leave your thoughts in there about any of the episodes as you've watched them. Let's pop on over to Twitter. S. Cole Recover said, Lovecraft Country episode 5, me screaming at the podcast. Letty was holding the baseball bat as a tribute to The Shining. Tic is looking for the pages of the book. He's going crazy. Brilliant catch there.
That is really good catch. And it's interesting you say that, Escol Recover, because like the camera is very deliberate down to Letty showing her holding the baseball bat, you know, for protection, in the same way that Wendy Torrance in The Shining does the same. So really, yeah, great spot. I just didn't even think of that reference, but now you say it, it's really a great catch. Thanks so much.
Yeah, definitely. There was another reference in the episode that we couldn't possibly have caught. Just the house where Montrose goes to Sammy, where they go and have sex. Where Sammy lives is actually the same district that Candyman used to prowl. So it's the same address or the same area of the city of Chicago that's prowled by Candyman in the Candyman movies. So tons and tons of references to horror movies over time.
Stuff.
There's no way I would have caught that other than seeing an article about it this week. Thanks so much, Esco Recover. Really good to hear from you. Thanks for shouting at the podcast. Hopefully you weren't on a bus somewhere when you were shouting at us. I've done that so often when I've heard podcasters miss something that I'm interested in. Also over on Twitter, Will B says, way to call your shot last week with William Christina. Absolutely nailed it. Also, it was great to see Montrose have that release of joy at the club. Almost makes me forget how terrible of a person he's been. Very complicated character.
Yeah, he really is. And again, it's one of the joys of this series so far is that, in one moment you are cursing at someone, and in another moment you're reveling in the joy of the particular situation that they find themselves in. It's almost a bit like the reverse with Tic, a bit being horrified by his actions in Korea.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the important things I think to reference in the show, that they're certainly not doing these things to make you forget what the character of Montrose has done and who he is in the past or anything like that. You're not supposed to be forgiving him for being a horrible person. It's just saying he is a person. There are complexities in his character. There are interesting other different things about his character. It's one of the most interesting things I heard recently on another podcast by, I'm not sure whether I mentioned this on the podcast before, John. I know we've talked to you about it, but on a podcast with Christopher Rice and Eric Shaw Quinn, where Eric Shaw Quinn was saying, if we are to accept that sexuality does not form the central part of every person who declares themselves as gay or declares themselves bisexual, if we accept that a proportion of the world are gay and a proportion of the world say that they're gay, well, that means no matter who they are and what the other background they have is, we have to accept that 6% of the a-holes in the world are gay, 6% of right-wing people that have different beliefs to other people are gay, 6% of every type of person in the world is gay, if that's the percentage that you subscribe to, I suppose. So what I love about this complexity of Montrose's character is, yes, he's an awful person, yes, he's also gay. Those two things aren't connected in any way.
Exactly.
So I thought that was a really good little revelation in there. Thanks so much for your feedback, Will B.
Yeah, thanks so much, Will B and Escol Recover.
I just wanted to take a little moment here to just say a huge shout out to Matt and Catfish over the Double P Network, doing a great job covering Lovecraft Country on Shock and Surprise. Really good, enjoyable podcast that they're doing over there. Again, they were doing coverage of Penny Dreadful, City of Angels. About the midway point of the season, they diverged in opinions to how we were looking at the show. And once again, great to hear that they have differing opinions as they go on in the series. So always great to listen to another aspect or another perspective on the show. I'm listening to about 3 podcasts, including the official podcast on this show on Lovecraft Country, and definitely every week checking out your show. Great.
Yeah, absolutely. Shock of surprise. It sounds like sort of, you get a pie and you would have this horrendous surprise coming out of it.
Really don't want to have that pie delivered to me.
Exactly.
I think the biggest surprise probably for them after naming their podcast is we haven't seen a Shoggoth since the 2nd episode. So,
well, that's true.
But great job, guys.
Also over on email, Steve Brown, comes back on episode 5 to say, one thing we have not seen on screen is the Christina to William change or the black to white change. Those have happened off screen. It must be something less brutal and bloody because it seems to happen quickly as well. Just a thought.
Yeah, I wonder about that. I wonder if it's something like there's a spell that transfers you into this other person. You know, when Ruby turns to Hillary, that transformation is like a spell that you'd see in like a Disney movie or something. And then the brutality is turning back into your own persona. One thing we didn't call out last week was Christina specifically says that William was murdered by the people in the society, that he was murdered and left for dead. And then Christina seems to take on the body of William. So William could have actually been a real person somewhere else, because we know that Hillary is a real person living in outside Ardham Lodge. We saw her in episode 2. So we know that Hillary is also the body of a real person. So that's an interesting thing, whether there's some kind of transfer there between those characters. But you're right, Rob, we didn't see those actual transitions on screen. We saw the really brutal transition of William back into Christina, and we saw the really brutal transition twice or three times in the episode between Hillary back into
absolutely.
Ruby.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for that, Steve. We also got an email from Edgar Mutebi over on our email at feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com. Some really interesting feedback about the color palette used on the show. I also saw tweets that we got in talking about this color palette and its usage. And I must say it's something that we haven't ever really talked about on our podcast. So I did want to read what Edgar sent in to us. Edgar says, hello from Massachusetts. My name is Edgar. I found this podcast during your coverage of Penny Dreadful's City of Angels. I was a big fan of the original, so much so that I remember being in my high school computer class when Showtime made the pilot available and free on YouTube in 2014. That's all to say, I was very excited about the reboot. Before I get into my theorizing, I wanted to take a moment and sincerely thank you for your kind words on the podcast after the murder of George Floyd. It meant a lot to me as a Black American and fellow genre fan. Speaking of being black in America, I'm really enjoying your coverage of Lovecraft Country and wanted to offer some insight into some things I've been noticing on the show. Some background first. I'm a film student and one of my favourite films is Nicholas Winding Refn's Neon Demon. It's a stylistically bright and colourful horror movie starring Elle Fanning and, amongst others, our very own Christina Braithwaite, played by Abby Lee. The movie seems to be about the dangers of the modelling world and Hollywood's obsession with beauty, but after multiple viewings, I figured out that the movie takes place in some kind of hell, and Elle Fanning's characters may be trying to be resurrected as a goddess, and the other models are some kind of were-animals who want to eat each other before she does. How did I figure this nonsense out, you ask? Colour story, colour palette, which brings me to Lovecraft Country. When watching The Neon Demon, I began to pay attention to the colours in the scenes and what they said about characters' motivations. I also started to apply this to the shows and movies I've been watching, including City of Angels and now Lovecraft Country. I think once you notice it, it's hard to ignore. So let's break it down. The colours of significance used in Lovecraft Country are yellow/gold, blue-green, red, pink-purple, black and white. You will notice it's only colours any character wears. You will notice it's the only colours any character wears. And just like the Neon Demon, I've been trying to figure out which colour means what. Here's what I found. First up, white means innocence, maybe naive, maybe pure. Black equals death. Gold/yellow equals power and authority. For example, the yellow shirt Tic is wearing in episode 2, alluding to his bloodline. In episode 4, Letty is wearing the yellow jumpsuit as she leads the group through the caves. This is after Christina tells her that the men think it's all about them. She later confronts Tic about this. She is also the one to swim to get the papers that go missing. Blue equals pioneering, determination, seeking. This is perhaps the most important colour. We see this whenever any character is active in the plot. Tic's blue pants have been constant throughout the season. He also wore a blue shirt at the museum as they were seeking Hiram's He also wore a blue shirt at the museum as they were seeking Hiram's pages. Letty also wore blue in the first half of the episode dealing with Christina and Tic, and also wore that dark blue dress in episode 3 as she was pioneering to live in a white neighborhood. Christina wore her blue outfit in episode 3 as her plot to get the house orrery is revealed. She is pioneering to get the power men have held onto for so long. That's a really interesting one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Edgar continues, green equals family/truth/safety. You can usually trust a character wearing this. For example, Christina wore that green necklace as she warned Tic of the ritual and gave him the gold ring. George wore a green and black because he was going to die shirt in episode 2, and Tic wore it around Hippolyta, Dee, and Montrose in episode 3. The most extreme examples of this is episode 4 when Hippolyta is talking to her father on the green phone while she is wearing all green. Red equals dangers. There are many examples of this, but I'll point out Letty's pants and blood-covered shirt in the pilot, and actually all the bloody white clothes by the pilot's end. And also Christina's red dress in episode 4. Letty's lips also red, especially around Tic, but I don't know why for this. Maybe she feels danger around Tic. Maybe that's the way they're exploring it.
Yeah, exactly. I think as well, between red can also be associated with passion as well. There could be that element.
That's true. Speaking of which, Edgar says pink is love or passion. Ruby wears a pink rose in the pilot and episode 4. Letty is wearing pink pants and black top. When Atticus first sees her, he's also wearing a pink shirt around Letty. I know that's a lot, but if you're still with me, I have some predictions. It's too late to say that I did predict George to be Tic's father. All the way in episode 1, I believe George cheated on Hippolyta, and that's why Montrose claimed Tic, but also to cover for his sexuality. My biggest clue, however, is that Michael K. Williams seems to only play gay characters now, like The Wire and Unhappen Leonard. And my last theory is that Christina is also a lesbian. I will admit I didn't catch on to the William thing until episode 4, but in episode 2, when they got to get breakfast outside, William pulls the chair out for Letty and he very clearly checks out her ass. They are also dressed in suits. One is dressed like a man and the other in a man's skin. One final prediction, William was also able to sneak up on them constantly because that little pocket watch of his or hers has the ability to stop time. That's a really interesting one.
That is a fascinating theory, Edgar. That would be fantastic because certainly time and space is very important here as well. Yeah. Even with the orrery, is of great importance to Christina. So, I like that theory a lot for sure.
Excellent. Edgar says, can't wait for the next episode. Sorry for the long email, but it's fun. And then emailed us again to say, after rereading the email, I saw that I forgot to critically expand on black and white colour choices and forgot orange. While white does mean innocent, I think it also implies goodness or naiveness in the scene or plot. Often this is the audience surrogate. For example, Tic and Letty were both wearing white tops when they start out in their road trip in the pilot. Innocent pioneering, if you will. Furthermore, in those scenes, George had black, which I do retain means death in most contexts, but also represents complexity in a scene as a juxtaposition to the naivety of the white colour, as in George has been on this trip before, and these two have never gone on this journey before. As for orange, I forget to say it represents sadness or confusion. In episode 3, Hippolyta was wearing an orange dress as she was ripping out those pages and also mourning George. In episode 5, Letty was wearing orange in the first half of the episode when she was hurt by Tic's actions and took the top off when she was having sex. I hope that makes sense. Edgar Mertebi.
Yeah, that's fascinating, Edgar. Thanks so much for your email. Yeah, I mean, certainly colour has huge signifiers. I think even in Penny Dreadful City of Angels, there is in Mama Vega's crypt, and not crypt. Crypt is the wrong word. But shrine to Santa Muerta. There are a number of different colors that she calls out. There's black, there's white, but also with yellow for power and authority, green for trust, safety. Really interesting that colors are an important theme for cultures. I think it's First Peoples in North America prized red above gold.
That's right.
As one of
the paint color.
The paint color. Really kind of interesting stuff here, and that you use that thematically throughout these pieces is really interesting.
Yeah. And it would really stand to the set decorators, the designers, the costumers, and everybody that's working on the makeup and all of those elements in a show like this to have color standing in for certain feelings in each of the scenes. That's a really cool idea.
Exactly. And I mean, frequently in the making of or behind the scenes type of additional content that you get, you just hear the level of thought and detail that's gone into the production, and the wardrobe, it's not by accident. And so fantastic, call. Thanks, Edgar, for the feedback.
Absolutely. And thanks so much for listening, Edgar. Hope we're doing justice to the season so far as well. So, thanks for joining us. A couple of final pieces of feedback. First up, Elaine, who says, hello, I'm Elaine, an African-American from Dallas, Texas. I love reading sci-fi and fantasy. I discovered your podcast while searching for different perspectives on Lovecraft Country on HBO. First of all, I love your accents and I love your take on the show. I read the book Lovecraft Country by Matt Ruff several years ago and I loved it, so I was very excited about the show. I often wonder how anyone but African Americans can understand our culture, history, nuances of our race. Not that you guys fully understand, but I love the tolerance and kindness you have all displayed in your podcast. I hope you don't mind, but I wanted to share a few historical points from the show that I thought merit some attention. The motorist travel guide mentioned in the show was a very real part of my people's life so that we could get out to see the country and travel around America. She also shared some photographs of the copy that she purchased on Amazon. Very cool. It is a real book. This is the book that George has written to help people.
George and Hippolyta.
George and Hippolyta, exactly. And then continues, during the audio of James Baldwin from the first episode, several of the scenes were taken from actual photos taken by Gordon Parks, and she included the photos there on her email.
Yeah, that was fascinating. Yeah. Again, that attention to detail. Totally. Really, from the production, really, really good.
Yeah, because there's even a moment, I think, in episode 3 or 4 when Christina comes up to Letty's house in the white neighborhood. She sees this mark on the ground, which has black and an arrow pointing to her house. That's a reference to something that absolutely, existed back in the 50s. It's also just referencing the fact that the neighborhood haven't forgotten about what happened to Letty in episode 3. They haven't forgotten that she's still a black person living in a neighborhood where they don't want her. They're still punishing her effectively. So some really good references to historical things that have gone on throughout America. Thanks for those pictures, Elaine. She continues, I'd also like to point out in episode 3, when the kids were in the attic playing with the Ouija board and Bobo asked if he would have a good trip, the board answered no. This is an homage to Emmett Bobo Teal, who was lynched in Mississippi in 1955. He was from Chicago. His death was one of the catalysts of the civil rights movement. Yeah, that was a really interesting reference they did in the show, Elaine, wasn't it, Jed? I think we caught that after watching the episode. That was.
No, I think one of our other listeners pointed out this reference because, absolutely for myself and Derek, it's not something that even crossed my mind. And yet, again, back to how well the show is capturing, the historical elements of that era, as well as the production designer doing. You see the tie that the actor is wearing, and you look at then the pictures of real life Emmett Bobo Teal, and because the tie is very distinctive that he was wearing, and they replicate that. So it's phenomenal seeing that level of detail, and also hearing this. Getting the additional context of this for us, because that's not something I would have heard of. This crazy lynching of a young kid, Emmett Bobo Teal.
Lastly, Elaine says, I know to many it's just a TV show, but to me and others in my community, it is a spotlight on art history mingled in with entertainment, showcasing some of our very talented actors, directors, and writers. I'm new to your podcast, but I wanted to let you know I appreciate your take on the show. I have subscribed and look forward to continued listening. Great work. From Elaine. Elaine, thanks so much. Genuinely, we jump into these shows. They are entertainment shows, and we're always open to learning about them. I think that's probably where we kind of take our stance from on shows, where we have a take on a TV show. We're watching it for entertainment, but if it's there to teach us something and we're there to learn, absolutely we're there and open, and we do our research and we look into everything that we learn from these shows. These are so heavily layered, just like Watchmen that we watched last year. Every episode is layered with things that we may not be aware of, being foreigners, being Irish people, watching on. There's so many things that we've learned from TV. And we absolutely depend on our listeners like yourself and like our other people that send us feedback for things that we may not pick up, things that pass by in the blink of an eye and we may not notice them. But they're so well incorporated into the show that we want to learn them. We're really intrigued by them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Elaine, for the email. Really great to hear from you.
Thanks, Elaine.
Finally, another email from Ron Smith that was sent to us after episode 1. Ron says, "Hey guys, I discovered your Pennyworth podcast and was pleased to see that 2 Brits were the hosts. I'm a Yank. When I started watching Lovecraft Country, I looked for podcasts. Fortunately, I saw that you guys were covering it. I just want to say that there is so much in the show that people can miss, from the references to black culture and history to the Lovecraftian elements. Fortunately, you guys nailed the first episode. I've only listened to one so far. I was so pleased that you knew it was James Baldwin's voiceover, as well as your discussion of Giovanni's room. Brilliant. I sometimes get frustrated when I listen to a podcast and the hosts are missing the big ideas in the show they're covering. I admit I was a little hesitant on how you would cover Lovecraft Country. What do these Brits know about the Black American experience? I was pleasantly surprised. So in closing, I just want to say, as a Black American, I admire the time and dedication you put into the pod. Keep doing what you're doing. Cheers, Ron." Thanks so much, Ron. And, equally applies to Edgar and to Elaine. But thank you so much, because I think we're very much learning as well. Yeah. We will certainly, if we can open and broaden our horizons and learn something more, pass it on to our listeners in this show that we do. We love it. And as well with your feedback, it's great that we can do that by telling us that we're going down and along the right direction, and also picking us up where we get it wrong. As I say, we are learning, and in some cases, other aspects of this we may be coming at it from that European point of view as well, which is predominantly white, and has its own nuances with black culture. In fact, I would say we probably know more about the American civil rights movement than possibly our own similar type movements within our own countries, for sure. Yeah. It's a strange thing to say, but it's one of those things of digesting American culture, that there's some underlying knowledge which may be right, it may be wrong, it may be partially right, partially wrong, or whatever it may be. And so we're happy to really sort of discover more from these shows. Yeah. Thanks so much for the feedback.
Absolutely. And thanks, Ron, for reminding me I do need to read Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin, because I know John absolutely loved that book when he read it years ago.
Yeah, it's a great story. And I think, again, like seeing with Montrose in the last episode, and the idea of being gay in your own community, that can be very, very difficult. Yeah. And I think, James Baldwin, and his book Giovanni's Room is an excellent kind of take, of gay fiction, and really well done.
Absolutely. Excellent. Thanks again, Ron. Just to mention, Ron, in his signature, he is an author. He's a published author. And guess what he's written, John? He's written an arc of Black Panther. Making my way through...
Great stuff.
Making my way through a ton of Black Panther comics at the moment. I really want to read Ron's take on Black Panther as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks so much, Ron. Thanks, Elaine. Thanks, Edgar. And thanks to everyone who provides in the feedback. It is so great to get your thoughts on this. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope you stay subscribed to the podcast. And of course, if you enjoy what you hear, why not share it with your friends? Sharing the podcast is, of course, sharing the love. You can subscribe to us, rate us, leave a review. You are more than welcome to do all of those things if you enjoy our dulcet tones. You can, of course, if you want to support us through Patreon as well, just go to patreon.com/TV Podcast Industries, and you're more than welcome to sign up there as well.
Yeah. Thanks so much to all of our patrons that have been supporting us over there. It's been really good of you to support us. It does keep the podcast going, because we're doing a lot of podcasts, which does take a lot of time and does take a lot of bandwidth to manage them. So thank you to all of you that are supporting the delivery of TV Podcast Industries.
Yeah, in any way that you feel you can support us, we are really, really appreciative of that support.
Absolutely.
So thanks so much. And of course, next week we'll be back with Lovecraft Country, Season 1, Episode 7, I Am.
Yahweh, I think, is translated to I am. So maybe another God connection.
Another God connection.
Yeah.
Or is it, I think, therefore I am?
Maybe. Maybe more the God connection.
I suspect so.
But if you do want to join us for something else, for a palate cleanser maybe, after the darkness and violence and horror that happens in Lovecraft Country, we also covered the slightly more funny darkness, horror, and blood and guts over on The Boys. We'll be back. The next episode that we'll be releasing on tvpodcastindustries.com is our discussion about episode 6 of The Boys season 2. So join us over there. A lot of fun on those episodes. And we'll be back with Lovecraft Country next time. Thanks for joining us once again.
Yeah, thanks so much, fellow Dreadfuls, for joining us. It is, again, a pleasure discussing this fantastic show with you. Remember, keep watching, keep listening, keep devouring souls.
Keep devouring souls.
Yeah.
Is that our ending note for the episode?
It is. Okay. Well, like Kumiho's spirit.
Okay.
Why not?
Okay, bye.
Or keep flicking your hairy tail. I don't know, whatever it might be.
I'm completely terrified. Please, somebody save me.
Well, let me just say, out of the 3 keeps, you should at least keep watching and keep listening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Bye.
Maybe less of the 3rd. Thanks. Bye.